Welcome to the 52nd edition of Make Pro Wrestling Majestic Again. I am Tiger Height.
And I am Peanut Gallery.
And so this is going to be an interesting topic. We did not make this up on the fly. We actually have a list. And we're talking about AEW and specifically the honeymoon phase.
Yep.
Is it over?
Yes, it is.
Okay. That's our show, guy. I'm just kidding. So we're going to present it. Let's start off with Peanut Gallery. So Peanut Gallery,
Great.
did you want to take it from here?
Yes. So in identifying whether or not the honeymoon phase is over, there are a couple of different things I think that we have to kind of look at when we're looking at whether or not kind of their little honeymoon is over. And I've kind of gone over and kind of seen, what the trend was doing and all that sort of thing. We're looking at everything from the signings to TV deals to like viewership numbers, that sort of thing, and just kind of what the trajectory of the brand is going forward. And a lot of it has to do with the way also the fans are reacting to the product as well. Mm-hmm. And, of course, each brand has their diehard fans who are just their brand loyal fans, that sort of thing. But, looking at it from the perspective of a novice, or not necessarily a novice, but someone who enjoys the product maybe in a different way than someone who is a fanatic.
We are not fans of a brand. We're fans of the sport of professional wrestling.
The art.
The art of it, right?
Right.
We
not
can
really a sport.
Right. We can look at each company and find positives and negatives, and we try to stay as bipartisan as mentally possible.
Mm-hmm. And I think that people understand that AEW did have a honeymoon period. I think there was a lot of hype towards the product. There was a lot of new things going on with the product, and they delivered on a lot of those things. But it's a little bit different now that the pandemic is over, now that we're able to have some sense of normalcy in terms of television ratings, in terms of having arenas at full capacity. We kind of had exited that period of innovation that we saw during the pandemic. And that happened right as AEW was going to be going into its normal phase, its non-honeymoon phase. And I think that, again, the pandemic really brought out the creativity in every wrestling company. Not just AEW, but every wrestling company had to go through some sort of phase of innovation in order to compete in such a market. But now that things are back to normal, we are now seeing the signs that AEW is no longer in its honeymoon phase. And there are a couple of identifying factors that play into that. The first one being just a general lack of excitement over debuts. And AEW has... We've talked about this on multiple occasions where AEW's roster is too bloated. And now they're actually starting to release stars instead of just sign and sign and sign. That's the first sign, in my view, that the honeymoon phase is over. That we are now seeing a more level trajectory of the number of people in their roster.
Right.
It's no longer just going up. I think it's going to remain flat or increase little by little.
You do not want the gimmick of the company to be signing big names.
Yeah,
because
that was that's part of every single wrestling company's honeymoon phase, is signing a lot of stars. Because you're the startup company, you want to be successful, you want to sign the big names. That's just how it works.
Here's how WWE did it different, though. They poached some of the biggest talents back in the 70s when Vince McMahon Jr., but the thing is that they did not make a big deal out of it. They signed them, and they did what they were supposed to do. It wasn't the actual signing.
Well, it was different back then.
It was very different. We're talking about 80 years difference.
But WWE had that honeymoon phase where they were signing a lot of big stars. They did. When they started
but that wasn't the gimmick. That wasn't the gimmick of the brand.
Again, way different era. But I'm just going through identifying points. The identifying point that I see that AEW is slowing down in terms of its honeymoon phase is the fact that they're no longer signing as many stars as they used to. And now it's becoming level as far as the number of people on the roster goes.
Right.
And I've noticed that quite a bit in recent months. The second one is more involvement from management in terms of
that smells desperation to me. That's starting to smell desperation.
So now the hype is no longer around. They're trying to keep the honeymoon phase is what I think I'm trying to get at by doing major announcement, by doing everything that they possibly can in order to maintain the audience like us that is now like, okay, this is kind of getting boring.
Right.
It's kind of getting same-y sort of thing.
Right.
And so with that lack of, I guess, that lack of appeal from people who are novices, people who don't watch it on a regular basis, all of these big announcements is just to get someone talking about it.
Right.
You know, it's not even about, there's a legitimate major announcement. It's just, it screams of desperation. So that's another identifying feature is just that over-reliance on what is the major announcement.
A major thing.
I mean, when you have a wrestling show, shouldn't the product speak for itself, essentially?
Yes.
We don't have to have this all the time.
ECW did it, and ECW failed. WWE doesn't do that a whole lot because that means that these major announcements, these big surprises, when the lights go out, it's not going to be as special.
Right, it's not as special. Because they do it on a weekly basis.
And you don't have to have that. If that is the gimmick for, I don't know why this conversation had to happen now. So they are over-reliant on it.
Right.
And if they don't have it, I think they're worried that people are going to lose interest. But the problem is that that's not the case.
Right.
The case is that you have the roster, you have the talent, and you have already people's interest. Just put on a good wrestling show without having like a big debut or a major announcement or a blah blah blah. It's not necessary.
Right. And so, you know, we're starting to see again that the product is kind of going downhill when they have to kind of make up for it. They have to extend that honeymoon phase by doing a big announcement, by doing a big debut. The whole formula just gets tiring after a while. It becomes something that is so regular that it doesn't feel special.
Right. And in some ways it doesn't. And I agree with you that AEW is starting to become too reliant on it, and that's not what's supposed to happen. And that's kind of where they're going to get hurt. Yep. If they think that they have to do this every week, we're going to have a problem here.
Yeah. And I think that they're going to start to experience the pains of actually trying to compete without
the shiny new toy has some wear on it now.
Right. So, you know, when it comes to that, they don't really know how to play the long game.
Right.
When it comes to it. And we should also then talk about some of these new stars that are coming in on the scene as well. A major example of what I've seen trending is Wheeler Yuta. And there are fans who are just like worshiping him at his feet.
I like Wheeler Yuta. I really do. And I'm a person who I am a fan, but there are people who are like, this is the future. But they said that about Hook. And Hook hasn't been on TV in a major capacity for almost 3 months.
Right.
He's going to have his Dynamite debut, but he's only had a handful of matches.
Right.
And Wheeler Yuta has definitely exceeded expectations, and I'm glad that they're doing this, but I think Wheeler Yuta is an example of what AEW, I think, is now going to start missing,
yes.
And that is the newer talent. They're building Wheeler, fine, and this stuff takes time, but I'm just concerned that they're just going to bloat the roster with the older, more established stars without thinking about your Wheeler Yutas and Hooks, and they're going to get pushed off.
Right.
In the lack of a better word, you know. Wheeler Yuta is not the example, he's the exception to the rule. But Wheeler Yuta is a perfect example.
And another thing, again, that we're seeing is that they are starting to, again, with the roster already built, there aren't any more major stars to sign, essentially.
Don't do the major star signing.
Right.
There's not necessary now.
there was an abundance of it, especially in 2020 and 2021 when WWE was getting rid of a lot of these wrestlers.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And that provided an ample opportunity for a company like AEW to kind of pick up on that, to pick up those stars that were on TV, those major stars in many cases as well. And now that phase is over, the business has to adapt accordingly. And I don't know that AEW knows how to adapt.
This guy needs to get off of social media.
It needs to adapt to now build up younger stars, but I just don't know that AEW has that infrastructure in place like WWE does.
Right. Well, now keep in mind of like the time that these companies have been in existence.
Right.
WWE has been around for a very long time. They had the opportunity to establish that system. AEW, we're going to start seeing the growing pains phase overall. But this guy, Tony Khan, bless his soul, and he seems like a chill dude, but he cannot be on social media.
And see, that's another thing that we're starting to see as well.
He looks completely unhinged.
Is now we're starting to see pushback whenever there's some sort of criticism of AEW, because now people are starting to speak up about some of the criticisms.
Well, something that we've been doing for fucking months.
Well, and that's another sign, though, that AEW's honeymoon phase is over. Because we didn't want to say anything bad about wrestling companies, about new wrestling companies. We never want to say anything bad about it. It's the shiny new toy. It's the new thing on the block. It's kind of like the NWO. When it first came out, it was like this huge, magnificent thing, and then you stretch it out over 3 years, and then all of a sudden
they overbloated it. They gave them too much power. But those are different circumstances. Right now,
but
pushing back on legitimate criticisms, the way that Tony Khan has been doing is not the correct move, especially right now. You could have gotten away with that, like maybe in the earlier days of social media, but nowadays you look like a psychopath.
Right. But let's talk about this too, because I think there was a very important point that Vince McMahon brought up when he did his interview with Pat McAfee, and he said that he doesn't listen to he doesn't listen to the fans on the internet. The fans on the internet are just whatever.
People can say whatever they want about Mr. McMahon. He's a very smart man, and he's
and he's just going to do business the way that he has always done business.
Because it's clearly been working.
Right.
Like that's the other thing. It's clearly working.
Right.
Why would don't break the wheel, or don't fix the wheel.
Right. And what Tony Khan is failing to understand is that you can't listen to the fans.
Now,
the fans are going to have all of these ideas, but you can't just do those ideas.
And don't blame the fans for a certain thing.
Right.
We, as a collective, I mean, you and I, we're a much different breed of fan. Like, we can look at each thing and say good and bad things, and I think that's why our show is very important, to just the general collective.
Right.
That we are very non-biased, and we will call it out. But Tony Khan, I'm sorry, when you're sitting there saying that bots are the reason for downward ratings, when you blame the fans for the debut of Saddam Singh or whatever his name was, going over like a wet fart in church, that's not anybody's fault but yours.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I have people with 30 years experience around me, and we listen to you guys. That does not look good for you, because that's not good PR.
And
just admit that you made the mistake of it, and then continue with the rivalry. I liked what happened after.
Right.
But when you do the lights out, lights on, you already gave the fans an expectation of a big debut.
Right.
if he came out like the Great Khali did in 2007, like, who the hell is this monster guy?
Right.
People would actually probably have perceived it differently.
Right.
But you didn't do that.
So, another thing, and this guy goes back around to my point about how AEW is kind of losing that honeymoon phase, how that honeymoon phase is over, and that is because the criticisms have started to increase.
Right.
And we've seen that, and you and I have criticized AEW, but at the beginning we were not quick to criticize because they were new, they were the shiny object. But now that they're more established, you are going to start to see.
Yeah, but we don't do that. I've never done that, and I never will. Even if it's the shiny new toy, if something is good, you're going to hear it from me. If it's something bad,
and have you noticed that we've said a lot more good things about earlier pay-per-views than we
are
now?
And that's the other thing. We're starting to see those cracks in the system overall.
Those cracks in the facade.
Now the wrestling is still good, but it's like, the older pay-per-view was better. Right. And I think overall, just structurally, it was. And I'm going to bring up a really big point in my part regarding that.
Yeah, and even,
it's only a prediction.
Right,
but.
and even, I might actually say something good about Dave Meltzer here for once, but one of the things is that even someone like Dave Meltzer isn't like giving as many 5-star matches, for example.
Right, he's not sitting there sucking the teat anymore because
he's sucking the teat in a different way, but he's not giving away 5-star matches like he did in years past with these, and
right.
I think that and again, Dave Meltzer is who he is, but he knows a thing or two about wrestling. So.
Oh yeah, so let's talk about this because this is a big point of contention that I even wanted to talk about. When I saw this,
right.
it was originally going to be in my part about this.
And here's my last point. And my last point is the very real possibility that fans who are actually fans are now starting to turn on AEW for certain things. This creative difference, even for those diehard fans, shows me that the honeymoon phase is over for AEW.
This is a desperation rivalry when you have to take something that was very not good on social media and put it in the limelight to get publicity. This is not the publicity that you want nowadays. And in the 90s, you could get away with this.
Right.
But you can't do it now, especially with the relationship and how it came here. I'm sorry. They know they cheated. We know they cheated. It's obvious. But when you put them on TV and you start to blank out the crowd because they're booing so much when these two are on screen, this is a problem, not for just them, but for the product in general. Yes. They're trying to manufacture crowd reactions now. WWE has done that forever. Forever. But we know this. And WWE does not put controversy in front of your face like this. This does not happen with a business.
Right.
So, they did in the past. You can't pull this off like Edge, Lita, and Matt Hardy anymore. You can't do that.
Right. But so again, the point I wanted to try and bring up is that there is legitimate pushback even from the most diehard fans who are willing to spend money to
look at the comments
to watch the product live. They're spending money, and they're criticizing this product.
This is not what they want to see.
Right.
They do not want to see this weird shit. They want to see good wrestling. That's it.
And so are they failing? And for me, it's like, you want a crowd to go. You want a crowd to be excited.
Right.
You want the crowd to
the unfortunate
enjoy the show.
The unfortunate part, the whole thing with Sammy Guevara and Scorpio Sky. Sammy Guevara won the title back, by the way.
I know.
But the whole antithesis of this rivalry muddied up what could have been a very good rivalry.
Right, because they were being portrayed as baby faces because obviously Dan Lambert's a top heel.
Right.
However, the crowd reaction is way different than
it bounced. It turned around where now Dan Lambert is pointing out stuff that's obvious.
Right.
And he's starting to become a baby face. Now there is talks that they're turning heel, which is whatever. But it hurt this so much.
Yeah.
and now we're going to start to see creative issues.
Yep.
And let's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. We're
going to start to see that phase.
Yep.
I don't know what, I kind of understood their long-term booking at first, but I think that they're kind of nearing the end of that, and now they have to.
This is a scramble.
They're scrambling to figure out what to do with this.
Right, and it's not just this rivalry. It's an example. Hangman Page and Adam Cole had a great match Good Friday at Rampage, right? But now the issue is, who is going after Hangman now? The rivalry is over. If they continue that rivalry, that's a WWE thing.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you have a Texas death match. That's the end of the rivalry. It was a clean victory. Like, that's it.
Right. And here's and again, they're trying to establish now they have this huge roster, but now I think it's time to establish a more clear hierarchy of wrestlers.
There's really not that. There's not a hierarchy of competitors. There's not a hierarchy of where people need to be.
Right. They just threw shit at the wall and saw what stuck. There is.
Oh, your green screen is like wanting to have an issue.
Yeah, there is no. I guess my point is that there is no. It doesn't seem like there's a direction going forward.
There's really not. I actually have to agree with you on that 100%. I feel like AEW right now in every facet is directionless.
I think
the women's division is weak as shit. And I'm sorry, I love Thunder Rosa, but who is she going to face now?
Right.
There's nobody who she can face. The tag team division is their strongest division.
And even then, that's always it's a mess.
I mean, it's not a mess. I actually think it's the most balanced and direct actual thing. The TNT champion thing was muddied by this, and then with the world title thing, it was there. Right. But it's like, who now?
There's just no hierarchy.
There is no singles competitor that I can point at and say
that's
next number one contender.
That's the next.
They never planned that. It's
right.
like Adam Cole was the obvious one. Yes, and they did that, and now it's over.
Right.
Who now?
Right.
Are you going to put in Hook, Danhausen? Who are you going to put in there?
Right.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's not anybody that is established. They threw Lance Archer at it, and Lance Archer did not take with the crowd because guess what? They just gave him a title match.
Right.
We don't want somebody to be given a title match.
Right.
Have them earn the title match.
Right. So I think at the end of the day, now that the cracks are starting to appear, I think that casual fans or fans that are not those diehard, defend AEW at every possible opportunity.
Right.
Are just going to start losing interest in the products. I think we've seen that with the television ratings going down.
They went up last week. Actually, no, they're fairly steady on the higher six.
They're trending downwards.
I kind of wish you
trended downwards over the last year.
I kind of wish you gave like one of those statistical things.
Yeah,
but I didn't think about it.
But they've trended downward, and I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that the honeymoon phase is over.
Yep.
And I think I've given a very compelling couple of points to tell you why and how I have identified their honeymoon phase being over.
So when we come back, I am going to present maybe not directly in opposition to that honeymoon phase, but the potential of something better. Mm-hmm. So when we come back, we'll do that, and we'll also fix the green screen. Okay, so we are back, and now I'm going to present ones where I think AEW still has potential to be good. Now, there are a lot of points where I definitely agree with you, and it's clear in the first part that I did agree with you in a lot of it. But there are a few things that I think you kind of missed the point, or they have delivered. I want to go back to the huge announcement thing, and here's the thing. I agree with you that the gimmick of there has to be a thing is not good, but every time that Tony Khan does this huge announcement, it's usual. It has always hit something good. Every time. He has not done an announcement that has failed. Because the last time that he did this, he announced that he bought Ring of Honor. That's a big deal, and that was a big deal. It saved a brand that's been around forever that people were so worried about on what the future was that it's going to be there. Now, if Tony Khan believes that this announcement is big, I'm curious to know what it's going to be. There's going to be a point in time when this huge announcement is that they're going to be purchased by WWE, I feel like. But I think that's much later down the road based on what it says. And also, here's the other thing. Speaking of TV ratings where we did drop off, yes, they did drop in ratings, but that's just regular television. It does this. It's not a trajectory of going down by hundreds of thousands. I think their last Dynamite and Rampage were around 800, 900,000. WWE does a million and a half, but that's not too far off. And especially a company that's only been around for less than 5 years, that's really good. And I think that in a way there is still interest, and there is no direction with it, but there's so much great potential that they just need somebody who knows how to structure and present long-term. And I'll talk about this here in a minute, but right now, Tony Khan is the head of creative. He cannot be the head of creative. The owner of the company should not be the head of creative.
Right.
Mr. McMahon isn't even the head of creative.
Although all creative decisions run by him.
They do run by him, but at the end of the day, that's just kind of what it is. He is not the head of creative. They have somebody who talks to them. It's like an executive in it's an executive and creative. They run by the boss on what they're looking at, and the boss in every company has the final say. Mm-hmm. But the problem is when the person who runs the creative, which are the veins and nervous system of a professional wrestling company, and the owner, there's no middle ground. There's no middle person.
Right.
And there has to be. Mm-hmm. I think Cody was the head of creative, wasn't he?
I don't know.
He was an executive vice president somewhere.
Right.
I do know that. But as regards to announcements, they're always really good. Right. So I'm going to be very optimistic.
But again, there's just an over-reliance on it. And if you have to do a huge announcement or a big debut every single week, that tells me that the product didn't ring as good.
The over-reliance on it is not good, but every time that a major announcement happens, it's usually major as it pertains to the wrestling community.
Right.
And let's talk about Dynamite and where that went and where that came from. Now, behind this, I'm going to see if I can turn this off because it's going to be indicative of what we're talking about, is that they go to a much larger brand in TBS. Uh-huh. And even on TBS, they're ranked very highly. They're in a much better position now than they were at the beginning of Dynamite's existence. And they went to TNT, to a nationally syndicated channel like TBS in a quick amount of time, which is why I'm sitting there saying there's definitely something more. And I think the ratings are kind of there. And I'm sorry, ratings are king at the end of the day. It's not WWE high, but you also have there's a 50-year difference with somebody who's been at the helm for a very long time with a much more established structure over generations of promoters. Compared to this is a new venture, and it's 100% solvent. They fund themselves for the most part, so the investment has gone over. And if AEW shut down tomorrow, it would still be a success because of that. The investment paid off long term, and it will. And I think they're going to be around for a long time. I think WWE will still buy them, but I think it's going to be very much down the road if they continue what I have been seeing over the last couple of weeks. Because I watch the show every week, I see what's happening, and I read and I follow, and I'm looking at it. And even within the structure of our show, where I get the most comments on our AEW stuff, people are now starting to see what I have been saying because it's obvious.
Right.
But and I'll make a point at the end. I think it really sort of capsulizes why AEW is kind of where it is. And let's talk about the diversification of its products. You have like 2 or 3 video games coming out soon. You have Dynamite on TBS. You have another hour of Rampage on TNT, which still does very good ratings for TNT overall. And then you have Dark and Dark Elevation. What I like about these is that this gives indie wrestlers an opportunity to be on a much bigger platform, even though they're not on television, a much bigger platform in general to showcase themselves. And I think AEW is still, I don't know why they're trying to compete with WWE still. It's a losing venture. You're going to lose every time going after the big fish.
Right.
When you're a new tech company, you don't go after Apple. You don't.
Right.
You kind of stay within your lane. And I think with AEW, if they really want to turn this around, they have to start doing that.
Right.
And the over antithesis on the we're not WWE it might cost them long term.
Right.
And I think my next point is gonna kind of be there. Mine's gonna be a little bit shorter, but I think I kind of got it. Cody. Cody Rhodes, a person who was so disheartened and so angry about his release from WWE and how he was treated. He really made this company work. And as soon as Cody left, and when we heard this, I think this is kind of where we started to see a snowball. And I think Cody was involved more in creative than even we thought. Because Cody has the generational lines of not only a legendary wrestler, but a booker with WCW and Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah.
Then you have your brother, Dustin, who's been around the business and was directly under the tutelage of Dusty for a good portion of his early career.
Yeah.
He's still there, but he's not an executive.
Right.
Which
I think it'll be an interesting case study that we can do in a couple of months to kind of see what creative looked like under Cody and what it looked like without
right.
him.
I think it's still too soon to see.
It's too early because we're still riding the coattails of a Cody
going back to WWE. And that's the thing. He went back to WWE, and a lot of people were like, oh, he's never going to do that. He already burnt that bridge with all of that. Clearly, that's wrong. Of anybody who I thought was going to WWE first, it was not Cody on my list at all.
And other wrestlers have come out and said that they'd be open to a WWE return.
Yeah, MJF is literally saying that I'm going to let my contract expire and see. And he's one of their top stars. And he's saying that. I'm not surprised.
No.
Now, could we have said this and could we have seen this maybe even a couple years ago? No. I think WWE is I think WWE is a little, maybe not scared, but their eyes are on AEW.
Well, yeah, their eyes are on the talent that is there.
Right. Well, their eyes are on the talent that's everywhere, but AEW poses still a threat to WWE. It's keeping them on their toes. Maybe not as much as WCW, but this is still one of the biggest financial backers with definitely a much better roster and definitely better TV deals to where they are actually in competition. I mean, you're on USA, Fox, and TBS. Those aren't small channels overall. WWE just has the luxury of being a lot older. They've already established those TV deals back in the late 80s, early 90s, where AEW, I think, had to sort of work a little bit more to get that opportunity to go back to a channel and to a company that rejected wrestling
At one point.
At one point, yeah. And they saw that there was value now with it.
Right.
And that's why it's still on there. But Cody going back to WWE, this is a big shot. This is a big shot. Because this is a situation where you're right. We're starting to see people leaving AEW for one reason. This is, I think, a much different reason. Or another with like your Joey Janela's, your Marco Stunts, who, were a big part of getting
The early days.
The early days, and they're gone, and they have expressed their disconcern and their apathy towards AEW. And then look at what happened with Adam Scherr and Control Your Narrative. And what he said about Tony Khan and AEW blacklisting their competitors for being a part of Control Your Narrative. That has not been confirmed.
But again, seeing a lot of those stories come out is telling me that the honeymoon phase of AEW is pretty much over.
And I think Cody, who was an executive, saw some writing on the wall. and he's trying to capitalize on this. I don't know how long Cody is going to be wrestling at this point. You know, he has a family. He has a brand that he still works with. He has the American Nightmare Cigars, and he still works with that Frankie Kazarian. But here's the thing with AEW. I mean, I do agree that the honeymoon phase is over, right? For the most part. But there is still value within AEW. Right. That's still good.
The question that we should probably end with is, what is the audience? What type of audience is going to remain after this? Because, like I said, a lot of the more casual fans,
they're starting to
wean themselves off.
Right.
They're not watching it as often. They're not. There's nothing compelling. There's no compelling reason for them to want to remain.
AEW has to do something different. And
otherwise, their audience is going
to dwindle down in a couple of years, and we're going to have another case study of TNA circa 2006, 2007.
That's like the first thing that comes to my mind is like, is this TNA?
I don't think it's that bad.
Hogan?
That was 2012. I was talking about when Kurt Angle debuted, and we had Christian Cage and Kurt Angle and AJ Styles there, and that's a much different situation. Right. I think with number one, with the honeymoon phase of AEW, is that people were desperate for that alternative to WWE.
They got the alternative. The alternative was great, and then the pandemic happened, and people wanted to watch it because it was entertainment value. But now that we're in a new era,
you gotta start switching up a little bit. You need to think more long-term story,
right?
And AEW literally has everything.
They have,
and I'm starting to see where they're going to make faults that TNA did, and we can't have that,
right?
Because then that shiny new toy is going to break, and that's when we're going to have a problem. Now, there are a lot of other great alternatives to WWE. I mean, obviously WWE's thing to watch. AEW still has a lot of great qualities.
But as far as casual viewership goes, I think
they gotta do something different.
I think they're going to start seeing that go down.
Right.
I think, like I said,
professional wrestling is driven by story. And you can say whatever you want about WWE, they understand that. I think with AEW, they have to have that. And they don't have that right now.
Right.
And I think Cody understands that story aspect. And as soon as he left, we don't see those stories anymore.
Right.
And I think that's why my conclusion and my theory is that Cody was a little bit more involved in creative than initially intended.
Well, we can explore that too, because like I said, this switch over to WWE obviously comes with caveats related to its creative.
Yep.
So I think we'll see a little bit more of that. I want to see how AEW kind of plays out over the next few months.
Yeah,
too.
I am still optimistic about AEW. There are still, like I said, a lot of great qualities, and the addition of Ring of Honor and doing that. Let's see what they do with it. Let's see the construction of what they're gonna do. And I'm very optimistic. But as it relates to the question of AEW having this honeymoon phase, it's over. We're starting to see cracks. We're starting to see it be like your everyday wrestling company where there's going to be good things like with WWE.
There's nothing special. It's not
special anymore. It's another wrestling company. And if you want to watch it, watch it. There's a lot of good things about it. But I also like Impact Wrestling. I also like NWA. And if I don't want to go to either a AEW show or a WWE show. I want to go to a smaller indie. And I think the exposure of other companies is really starting to, I think it actually accelerated this honeymoon phase. Because a lot of these stars that are coming from like GCW, and then you're starting to see those AEW stars go to GCW. They're going to Impact. They're going to New Japan, and
I don't know what point you're trying to make with
that. They're making these collabs. The fans of AEW who want to watch like your John Moxley's go to GCW. They watch GCW. Oh, that's a great product. I'm not going to watch AEW anymore.
Well, I don't know what that has to do with the honeymoon phase being over. I'm trying to follow you.
That's part of the honeymoon phase.
They're still doing that though.
Yeah, they dispersed people's thing. It was more about ratings other than the honeymoon phase. Because you know why? Because people.
I'm not following you. Like I legitimately can't follow you at this point. I don't know what you're trying to prove.
AEW, I think, is now bloated to the point of people seeing it as WWE light.
Pretty much. It's not special.
Right.
It's not special. That's the point.
It's not special anymore. So we'll see what happens. If you do agree with us, let us know in the comments down below. If you don't, we want to hear your counterpoints to what we have been talking about. Mm-hmm. AEW fans are very passionate, so please keep it civil, as civil as they can be. And you know, if we brought up points that you didn't even think about, once again, let us know. Comment down below. I love reading the comments, by the way. Become a patron, where we watch the shows live. We do maybe different commentary. There's still stuff in the works as it relates to that. And also subscribe, like this video, share it with all your friends.
What are we doing next week?
Next week, we are talking about Rebellion. Impact Wrestling Rebellion. I almost called it Revolution for some reason. Rebellion. So we're going to do
Impact Wrestling, baby.
Yep. I hope they come back to Vegas soon because I love going to Impact shows.
Anyways.
So, yes, like, subscribe, follow, share. Join us on our Patreon. Join us on our Discord. There is a link, that link tree, this little thing right there. Scan that.
That's
Boom.
called a QR code.
Well, it's a link tree QR code.
Yeah, I know. That's a QR code.
It is a QR code, but it gets you to everywhere where we are. So all of our podcast platforms, your YouTube channel, everywhere. As always, be
majestic.
And also have a safe and great rest of your Easter.